A wealthy lawyer accidentally drops his wallet stuffed with cash right in front of a blind homeless boy sitting on the sidewalk with his blind German shepherd. His wife is certain the boy will steal it. But when the boy bends down, feels for the wallet, and makes a choice no one expected, the lawyer's world and his heart are changed forever. The late afternoon sun bathed the seaside town of Seabrook in gold. The gulls circled lazily over the fishing boats returning to the docks, their cries mixing with the hum of distant engines and the salty tang of the Atlantic breeze. The streets in the town center were busy with both tourists lingering over ice cream and locals rushing home from work. Main Street, the heart of the town, was a place where old brick facades met freshly painted shop fronts, bakeries with steaming loaves in the window, antique stores filled with maritime relics, and coffee shops with chalkboard menus out front. Driving down this bustling street was Michael Harrison, a man whose name was known throughout Seabrook and beyond. Michael was in his mid-50s, tall with the broad shoulders of someone who had once been an athlete. His dark hair was flecked with dignified streaks of silver, and his face bore the deep lines of a life both challenging and rewarding. As the owner of Harrison and Company law firm, he had built a fortune representing corporate clients, but he was equally famous for his acts of quiet generosity. Anonymous donations to local shelters, paying off hospital bills for strangers, and funding scholarships for children from struggling families. His warm hazel eyes carried the kind of empathy that could put anyone at ease, yet there was a firmness in his jaw that hinted at a man who stood unshaken by opposition. In the passenger seat sat Sarah Harrison, his wife of 28 years. Sarah was tall, willowy, and immaculately dressed in a cream-colored coat that fell perfectly to her knees. Her blonde hair was cut in a sleek bob, and her blue eyes were sharp, observant, sometimes too much so. Sarah had been warm and trusting in her youth, but a tragedy 12 years earlier had altered her worldview. The loss of their infant son during childbirth, at least that was what she had been told, had left a scar she never truly allowed to heal. Over time, that grief calcified into a kind of guardedness. She smiled less freely, questioned people's motives, and often equated caution with wisdom. In public, she was polite but cool. In private, she could be cutting when she thought Michael's kindness was naive. As the car rolled toward the red light at the corner of Main Street, Michael slowed to a stop. The air smelled faintly of roasted coffee from the cafe across the road. Sarah gazed out the window absently, until her eyes settled on a small figure sitting on the corner sidewalk. It was Jacob. Jacob was around 12 years old, small for his age, with a slight frame that spoke of missed meals and cold nights. His skin was pale under the smudge of street dust, and his dark hair stuck out in uneven tufts as if it had been cut with dull scissors. Behind a pair of oversized, scratched sunglasses, his eyes were hidden entirely. Anyone who looked closely would notice the way his head tilted slightly as he listened for the movement of people, the steady tapping of his hand against the concrete to orient himself. Jacob had been blind since birth, his world made up of sound, smell, and the warmth or chill of the air. Beside him, lying with a dignified stillness, was Captain, a large German shepherd with a striking coat of black and tan, though its once bright eyes were clouded over by a milky haze. A neatly folded white scarf was tied gently around the dog's head, covering its eyes like a bandage. Captain's ears twitched at the sounds of the street, and every so often his nose lifted to scent the air. He was older, perhaps 8 years old, his muscles still strong but his movements careful, as though he could remember the days when he could see and ran with purpose. Even in blindness, there was an air of loyalty in the way Captain kept his body close enough to Jacob that their shoulders touched. Michael's face softened as he saw them. "That boy again," he murmured. "Always with that dog." Sarah's gaze was cool. "Sitting there every day holding out his hand. You've probably given him money before." Michael glanced at her. "Once or twice. And you can't deny he has a companion who depends on him." That dog," Sarah interrupted, "is just part of the act. People see a blind kid with a blind dog and their wallets open. You really think that money goes to food? More likely to someone who put him there." Michael's hands tightened briefly on the steering wheel. Not everyone's a scammer, Sarah. Sometimes life just deals cruel cards. The light turned green, but Michael didn't move yet. The cars behind him began to honk. With a resigned sigh, he eased forward, turning down a quieter side street. You've made up your mind about him without knowing his story. And you, Sarah replied, make up your mind that everyone's worth saving. Her voice softened, though not with warmth. You don't see how dangerous that is. They drove in silence for a moment before Sarah suddenly said, let's test your theory. Michael glanced at her, eyebrow raised. What do you mean? Let's put this honesty you believe in to the test, Sarah said, her eyes narrowing slightly. She pointed back toward Main Street. That boy, Jacob, if that's his name, he's there every day. You have your wallet, don't you? Take out everything except your ID and cards. Put in, say, $1,000 in cash. Walk past him, drop it accidentally, and keep walking. Let's see what happens. Michael gave a short, incredulous laugh. You want me to bait a kid into stealing? I want you to see reality, Sarah replied. If he returns it, I'll personally hand him a reward and never question you giving money to strangers again. But if he takes it, then you agree to stop rolling down your window for every beggar you see. Donations to charities are fine, but no more street handouts. Michael thought for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Deal. But you're going to be surprised, Sarah. Back on Main Street, the bustle hadn't changed. Footsteps, chatter, the occasional bark of a dog. Michael parked the car where they had a clear line of sight to Jacob and Captain. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a well-worn leather wallet. Carefully, he removed all personal documents and credit cards, tucking them into the glove compartment. From another pocket, he counted out 10 crisp $100 bills, folded them neatly, and slid them inside. Sarah watched with folded arms. That's a lot of temptation for one child. Or one chance to prove himself, Michael said as he stepped out of the car. The late afternoon light was beginning to mellow, casting long shadows from the lampposts. Michael walked toward the corner with a steady pace, passing a shop selling saltwater taffy and a busker playing guitar. As he neared Jacob and Captain, he kept his eyes forward, his steps measured. Then, with a subtle movement, he let the wallet slip from his hand to the pavement just beside Jacob's feet. Jacob's head turned slightly at the sound of the object hitting the ground. Captain's ears perked. The boy's fingers searched the air, then brushed against the leather. He picked it up and held it for a moment, feeling its shape. With a small furrow in his brow, he set it in his lap. Michael kept walking, resisting the urge to look back. He turned the corner out of sight. From their vantage point in the car, Sarah leaned forward, eyes fixed on Jacob. She saw the boy open the wallet slightly, his fingers moving across the folded bills. His lips pressed into a thin line. Then he slipped the wallet into the front pocket of his worn jeans, his posture unchanged, one hand still extended for coins from passers-by. Sarah leaned back in her seat with a small, almost triumphant smile. Well, she murmured to herself. Jacob, for his part, sat quietly, listening to the sounds of the street. The warmth of Captain's fur against his arm was a steady comfort. He was thinking about the last time he had tried to return something valuable, and how it had been stolen from him before he could find the rightful owner. If someone came looking, he would be ready. Until then, he would stay where he was, and Captain would be right there beside him. The night had settled over Seabrook with the quiet hum of distant waves breaking against the shore, the salt-heavy wind carrying the tang of the ocean through the empty streets. Main Street's shops were dark now, their cheerful window displays shuddered against the chill. Jacob sat cross-legged on a flattened piece of cardboard in the shadow of a brick wall. Captain curled tightly beside him for warmth. The air was damp, and the faint mist rolling in from the harbor clung to their clothes, seeping into the bones. The flickering glow of a street lamp cast long, uncertain shadows, as though the light itself hesitated to intrude upon their corner of the world. Jacob's fingers idly rubbed the fraying edge of an old wool blanket draped around his shoulders. It was the only real possession he owned, a faded tartan thing, worn thin in places, but still holding a ghost of warmth. It had been given to him by a man named Tommy Granger 3 winters ago, on the night their lives first intertwined. Tommy had been a tall, wiry man in his late 50s, with a tangled beard streaked with gray and a pair of bright, startlingly kind green eyes that seemed almost out of place in his weathered face. He had the shuffle of someone whose joints ached in the cold, but whose spirit hadn't been entirely broken by years on the streets. That night, the winter wind had been merciless, carrying with it the bite of an approaching snowstorm. Jacob, just 9 at the time, had been huddled under the eave of an abandoned seafood shack, clutching himself against the cold. Captain, much younger then but already sightless, had been lying beside him, shivering so hard that Jacob could feel the tremors through his own body. The street had been deserted except for the hiss of snow against asphalt and the creak of the shack's loose sign in the wind. Tommy had emerged from the shadows, carrying a paper bag from a church pantry. His boots were split at the seams, but he moved with quiet purpose. "You'll freeze out here, kid," he'd said in a voice roughened by years and cigarettes. When Jacob had shrunk back, wary, Tommy had crouched down, the bag rustling as he pulled out the blanket and a small loaf of bread. "I'm not here to take anything, just here to give." Jacob remembered how Captain had lifted his head then, nostrils flaring at the scent of the bread, but hadn't growled. The dog's tail had given a tentative wag, as though recognizing something good in this stranger. Tommy had smiled at the dog, his green eyes softening even more. "Got yourself a guardian, I see. That's worth more than gold out here." Over the weeks that followed, Tommy became their quiet anchor in a drifting world. He taught Jacob how to navigate the streets by sound, counting steps between intersections, listening for the way footsteps echoed off brick versus concrete. He showed him how to keep Captain close, with one hand lightly on the dog's back and the other tapping along walls and curbs. Most of all, he gave Jacob something rare: consistency. But Seabrook winters were cruel, and so was fate. One bitter night in early spring, Tommy simply didn't wake up. Jacob had found him sitting against the wall of the old train station, his blanket folded neatly over his knees, the faintest trace of a smile on his lips. In the pocket of Tommy's coat was a scrap of paper, the words written in an uneven scrawl: "Keep your heart clean, son." Jacob had kept the blanket and the words, guarding both fiercely ever since. Captain had his own history, though Jacob only knew parts of it, pieced together from overheard conversations and the fragments Tommy had shared. The dog had once belonged to Sergeant Daniel Morris, a decorated U.S. Army veteran with a broad chest, sun-browned skin, and a calm, steady demeanor. Captain had been trained as a service dog, learning to guide, protect, and even anticipate needs before they were spoken. His sharp amber eyes had once scanned everything, his ears twitching to commands barely above a whisper. Then came the explosion. A training exercise gone wrong at a remote base had left Captain blinded, his right ear torn, and his once vivid eyes clouded forever. Daniel had refused to have the dog put down, insisting that loyalty like Captain's deserved the same in return. For 3 more years, they had been inseparable, man and dog, wounded in different ways but whole together. When Daniel passed away from a sudden heart attack, Captain had been handed over to a shelter that didn't have the resources to care for a blind animal. One rainy morning, the gate to the shelter's yard had been left open, and Captain had simply walked out, his paws finding the road like he was following a map only he could sense. Days later, he had wandered into Seabrook, hungry and wet, where Jacob had heard the faint jingle of a tag and the soft whimper of an animal as lost as he was. From that day forward, they were a pair, Jacob's ears and Captain's nose, 2 sets of instincts compensating for what the other lacked. They had developed an unspoken rhythm. Jacob would listen for the click of crosswalk signals and the distinct rumble of certain buses, steering them along safe routes. Captain, in turn, could detect the warm scent of bread from half a block away or hear the approach of footsteps Jacob hadn't yet noticed. They shared their meager meals, curled together under the tartan blanket when the nights bit hardest, and guarded each other with a fierce, silent devotion. Now, on this damp evening after the incident with the wallet, Jacob sat with Captain's head resting across his lap, fingers absently stroking the dog's fur. He could still feel the weight of the wallet in his pocket, its edges pressing lightly against his thigh like a reminder. He thought of Tommy's note. Keep your heart clean. That meant doing the right thing even if it took time. He couldn't just hand it to the first person who claimed it. He'd learned that lesson painfully when a man had once snatched a lost bill from his hands, shoving him aside before vanishing into the crowd. Across the street, a door banged open and a voice called out, a rough, low drawl. Jacob didn't know it yet, but the voice belonged to Earl Hook Dempsey, a wiry man in his 40s with a patchy beard and a habit of hooking his thumbs in his belt. Earl had a reputation in the alleys for trading in whatever would make quick cash. Old bicycles, stolen tools, even animals. His left eye twitched when he was thinking, and right now his gaze had locked on Captain. Earl crossed the street slowly, boots scuffing the pavement. Captain's ears shifted, his body tensing. Jacob felt it immediately. Easy, Cap, he whispered, his hand firm against the dog's shoulder. Nice dog you got there, kid, Earl said, his tone just shy of friendly. Jacob's chin lifted. He's mine. Sure he is, Earl drawled. Bet a dog like that could fetch a good price, even blind. Some folks like the challenge. Jacob didn't answer. He didn't have to. Captain let out a low growl, a rumble that vibrated through Jacob's legs. Earl smirked, took a step closer, then glanced down the street as the faint sound of police radio static drifted near. Without another word, he turned and melted into the shadows. Jacob exhaled slowly, stroking Captain's head. Don't worry, buddy. I'm not letting anyone take you. Above them, the street lamp flickered once, then steadied. Somewhere in the distance, the foghorn groaned out over the harbor, and the air seemed to thicken with the promise of rain. Jacob adjusted the blanket around his shoulders, leaning back against the wall. Tomorrow he would figure out how to return the wallet. Tonight, all that mattered was keeping warm, keeping safe, and keeping Captain close. The night was cold, and the streets carried the chill of winter's approach. Jacob lay curled against Captain under the partial shelter of a shuttered storefront. The sounds of the city were constant. Car horns in the distance, the rustle of newspapers blowing along the pavement, and the faint voice of a street musician singing to no one in particular. Jacob's hands fidgeted with the worn leather wallet he had found earlier. It wasn't his, and he knew it carried weight far beyond the bills inside. The corners of a small rectangular card peeked out from one of its compartments. Smooth to the touch, stiffer than the paper he usually encountered. Jacob's unseeing eyes stared into the blackness as he whispered to Captain, "There's something here. Feels different." Captain shifted his head, the white scarf tied over his eyes brushing against Jacob's hand as if affirming his words. Jacob sighed. He could not read what was on the card, and that realization filled him with frustration. Morning broke, gray and restless. The air smelled faintly of roasted coffee from a nearby vendor. Jacob stood uncertain, the wallet still clutched in his fingers. He had made a decision. We can't just keep this, Captain. Someone might need it. He hesitated. But I can't even read where to bring it back. Just then, a familiar voice rang out, hoarse, yet warm. Jacob? Is that you again? It was Mrs. Linda Carter, the woman who ran a tiny newspaper stall at the corner. She was in her late 60s, her frame a little bent from years of standing, with gray streaks running through her tied-back hair. She always wore the same wool coat, patched at the elbows, and spoke with a kindness that contrasted her hard city life. Jacob tilted his head toward her voice. Mrs. Carter, could you help me? I found something inside this wallet, a card. I don't know what it says. She wiped her hands on her apron, took the card gently, and squinted. Her eyesight wasn't perfect, but she managed. It says Harrison and Company, law firm, Main Street, Building 14. She let out a soft chuckle. That's a place for the rich folks, boy. What are you doing with this? Jacob straightened his back, his tone serious beyond his years. It's not mine. I need to give it back. Mrs. Carter studied him for a long moment, then sighed, handing the card back into his small hand. You've got more honor than half the people walking these streets. But be careful, Jacob. Not everyone will see it that way. The next morning, Jacob and Captain set out. Captain led carefully, guided by scent and the faint tug of Jacob's hand on his harness. Together, they navigated the uneven sidewalks. Jacob listened for the echo of his cane against nearby walls and counted his steps, while Captain sniffed every corner, alert to obstacles. When they finally reached the looming structure of Harrison and Company, Jacob could sense it immediately. The sounds were different. The air carried the echo of polished shoes, brisk conversations, and the distant hum of elevators. The smell of perfume, polished wood, and ink lingered faintly around the marble steps. As Jacob and Captain attempted to enter, a harsh voice cut across the air. "Hey, you can't be here." It was the security guard, a tall man with a heavy build and a stiff blue uniform. His tone was sharp, his footsteps firm as he approached. "This is private property. No beggars allowed." "I'm not begging," Jacob replied softly, clutching the wallet. "I'm here to return something that belongs to one of your people." The guard scoffed. "That's what they all say. Now get moving." He stepped closer, his irritation mounting. Captain instinctively shifted in front of Jacob, his black and brown fur bristling under the white scarf. The guard, not realizing the dog's condition, shoved him roughly with a boot. Captain yelped, stumbling, and in the commotion, the scarf slipped off, revealing his cloudy eyes. Jacob gasped, dropping the wallet as he bent to gather Captain into his arms. "What's going on here?" The commanding voice belonged to Michael Harrison himself. He had just exited the elevator, his tailored suit crisp, his briefcase in hand. His face was etched with both authority and curiosity. The commotion at the door had drawn his attention, and now he stood observing the strange pair, the blind boy clutching his equally blind dog, the guard looming over them, and a wallet lying on the floor between them. Jacob's head lifted slightly at the sound. "Sir, I found this wallet. I only wanted to return it. Please, I mean no harm." Michael's gaze fell on the wallet, recognition dawning. He picked it up, flipped it open, and saw his own identification. His stern expression softened into astonishment. "It's mine," he murmured. Then louder, "This boy, he brought it back." The guard shifted uncomfortably. "I thought he was here to cause trouble." "Enough," Michael snapped, his authority cutting through. "You will never again treat someone with such cruelty in this building." Sarah, who had been walking behind Michael, stopped short. She was tall and elegant, her blonde hair tied in a neat bun, her cream-colored coat flowing around her. Her blue eyes, always sharp with judgment, now held something else: confusion. She had assumed this boy, the ragged child from the street, was nothing but another beggar. Yet here he was, selflessly returning a wallet full of money. She watched as Jacob bowed his head, holding Captain protectively. The dog, despite his blindness, pressed against the boy's side with quiet loyalty. Something in that image stirred an ache deep within her chest. Michael crouched slightly, lowering his voice to Jacob. "You returned this without taking a single bill." "Why?" Jacob answered simply, "Because it wasn't mine. And because someone once told me, keep your heart clean." His small fingers tightened around Captain's fur. Michael's throat constricted. He reached forward, touched Jacob's shoulder gently, and whispered, "You did more than return my wallet, son. You've reminded me what honesty looks like." Sarah cleared her throat, her composure cracking. "Michael, perhaps we should take them to lunch. And Captain should be checked by a veterinarian. He was hurt." Her own words surprised her. She had never imagined herself speaking with such softness toward a child from the streets. Michael's approving smile only deepened her confusion. That afternoon, for the first time in years, Jacob sat at a warm table. Sarah ordered clothes for him, choosing a modest jacket and new shoes. A veterinarian examined Captain, gently reassuring Jacob that the dog would heal with care. As they ate, Sarah's eyes lingered on the boy. She couldn't shake the feeling gnawing at her heart. The shape of his face, the innocence in his voice, the scar faintly visible at the edge of his hairline. It all pulled her toward a truth she wasn't yet ready to name. But one thing was certain: Jacob and Captain were no longer invisible. The door that had slammed so many times before had, for the first time, opened wide. The late afternoon sun in Seabrook had dipped low enough to paint the harbor in molten gold, each ripple on the water catching a shard of light. The tide was rolling in, and the rhythmic push and pull of the waves seemed to echo the quiet unease growing in Sarah Harrison's chest. She sat on the back porch of her home, a white two-story with blue shutters, sipping tea from a porcelain cup that once belonged to her mother. From her seat, she could see Michael in the yard tossing a soft rubber ball to Captain, who barked happily each time he caught it, guided by Jacob's steady voice calling out directions. The boy's thin frame moved with surprising grace for someone without sight, his steps sure and quick as though the world around him had edges he could sense, not see. Sarah had never been one for sentimentality, but something about the boy unsettled her. The way his head tilted when listening, the shape of his jaw, and, most of all, the small crescent-shaped birthmark just below his left ear. She had seen that mark before, though only once, 12 years ago, in a hospital room where sterile white sheets and the scent of antiseptic had drowned her first moments of motherhood. Back then, the doctors had told her the baby had not survived. Her mother, Margaret Whitfield, a tall, imposing woman with ash-gray hair always pulled into a severe bun, had been at her side. Margaret had always been a woman of steel, sharp-tongued, commanding, and impossibly hard to please. Years of growing up in her shadow had left Sarah cautious, mistrustful, and hesitant to show vulnerability. That night, grief had swallowed her whole. She had never questioned the truth until now. As she watched Jacob kneel to adjust Captain's scarf, her heart began to race. When Michael came up the porch steps, brushing grass from his sleeves, she forced a smile. "I'm going to the attic," she said softly, her voice tight. The attic smelled faintly of cedar and dust, with a single round window that faced the sea. Old trunks, stacked and marked with fading labels, lined the walls. She pulled one toward her, a mahogany chest that had belonged to her mother. Inside were neatly folded shawls, brittle photographs, and a small box tied with blue ribbon. Sarah's hands trembled as she untied it. Inside, among old letters and pressed flowers, was an envelope addressed in her mother's elegant handwriting. "For Sarah, when the time is right." Her breath caught as she unfolded the letter. "Sarah, there are truths I could not bear to tell you then. Your boy was alive, but I could not see him live blind. You deserved a life free of burden. I placed him elsewhere, believing it was for the best." The words blurred as her eyes welled. Her mother, her own mother, had decided Jacob's fate without her. And the boy was blind. Sarah sank to the floor, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. Downstairs, Michael was making dinner, his easy baritone filling the kitchen as he hummed an old tune. Jacob sat at the table peeling an orange, Captain at his feet. Sarah entered quietly, the letter folded in her pocket. She took a seat across from Jacob, studying his face in the warm kitchen light. "Jacob," she began, "do you know anything about your parents?" He shook his head. "Not much. The man who took me in found me near a bus station when I was little. Said I'd been left there." His voice was calm, but there was a hint of something brittle beneath it. Michael glanced up from the stove, sensing the weight in her tone. Sarah's fingers curled around the edge of the table. "Would you let me run a DNA test? Just to know." Jacob hesitated, reaching down to scratch Captain's ear. "If it matters to you, I'll do it." The next morning, Sarah arranged the test through a discreet contact at the local clinic. Dr. Howard Green, a tall, thin man in his late 40s with kind hazel eyes and a manner that put patients at ease, took the samples quickly. "Results in 3 days," he said. While they waited, Michael took Jacob and Captain back to Dr. Ellen Price's veterinary clinic. Ellen had more news this time. Captain's eyes aren't completely damaged. There's scar tissue, but with surgery he could regain partial sight. She explained the risks, the costs, the long recovery. Michael didn't hesitate. "Do it. And while you're at it, I want to set something up for Jacob too, whatever medical care he needs." Jacob's mouth opened, closed, then opened again. "You don't have to." "I know." Michael said simply. But I want to. That night, Sarah stood by the upstairs window, looking out at the dark stretch of ocean. The waves below were relentless, hiding their secrets beneath their endless motion. Her mind was a storm. Joy at the thought of finding her son, grief for the years lost, fury at her mother for the theft of a life she could have had. 3 days later, Dr. Green called. Sarah was in the law office's private conference room when she answered. His voice was steady. The results are in. Jacob is your biological son. She gripped the phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. Outside the glass walls, she could see Jacob in the waiting area, running his hands over Captain's head while Michael talked to the receptionist. She wanted to run to him to tell him everything. But the image of her mother's letter burned in her mind, and the wound of betrayal was still raw. When she finally stepped into the waiting area, she managed only a quiet, "Let's go home." Jacob smiled faintly, unaware of the tide that had just turned beneath his feet. The winter winds had begun to soften in Seabrook, bringing with them the salt-sweet scent of the ocean and the first timid hints of spring. The white shutters of the Harrison home fluttered against the breeze, while gulls wheeled overhead in lazy arcs. Inside, the air was tinged with antiseptic and the faint warmth of homemade chicken soup. Sarah's attempt to make the house feel like a place of comfort, not recovery. Jacob lay on the living room sofa, a light blanket pulled up to his chest. His hair was still mussed from the pillow at the clinic, and bandages covered his eyes in neat white layers. At his feet, Captain rested his head on the boy's ankle, the shepherd's own eyes swathed in soft gauze. The dog's breathing was slow and steady, a comforting rhythm in the quiet room. Michael sat in the armchair opposite, his frame leaning forward, elbows on his knees. His usual calm was edged with restless energy. He had spent the morning pacing the house, as if movement alone might make the healing go faster. "How's the pain?" he asked, voice low. "It's okay," Jacob replied, fingers brushing over Captain's fur. "Feels weird, like my face is wearing too many hats." His dry humor coaxed a faint smile from Sarah, who was curled in the corner of the couch with a notebook in her lap. She had been scribbling ideas for days now, visions of something bigger than just their story. The surgeries had been a leap of faith. Jacob's had been riskier, nerve reconnections and delicate lens work, while Captain's involved clearing scar tissue and reshaping part of the cornea. Dr. Howard Green had explained the odds in sober detail, but neither Michael nor Sarah had hesitated. 2 weeks passed in a slow dance of medication schedules, whispered conversations, and moments of shared silence. Sarah often found herself lingering in the doorway at night, watching Jacob's chest rise and fall, Captain curled protectively beside him. She thought about all the years stolen from them, but also about the strange, miraculous path that had brought them back together. On the morning the bandages were to come off, Seabrook was wrapped in a pale mist that softened every edge of the harbor. At the clinic, Nurse Diane Carter, a middle-aged woman with warm brown eyes and a voice like velvet, guided Jacob gently into an exam room. She had been there for every appointment, her patient kindness making even the most nervous patients breathe easier. Dr. Green entered moments later, his hazel eyes bright behind his glasses. "Ready?" he asked. Jacob swallowed hard. "Yeah." The first layer of gauze came away with a soft hiss of tape. Then the second, and then slowly the final wrap. Jacob blinked against the sudden flood of light, his pupils contracting. Shapes swam in and out of focus, the room a patchwork of color and shadow. But then, faintly, he saw it. A face. Michael's tall frame, dark hair, the outline of a smile breaking through. "Dad!" Jacob's voice cracked. Michael's throat tightened, but he nodded, a tear slipping free. Sarah stepped closer, her hand trembling as it brushed Jacob's cheek. "I'm here too, sweetheart." Her form was blurrier, her hair just a golden halo, but he could feel her there, solid and real. On the floor, Captain let out a sharp bark as Dr. Ellen Price, the vet, crouched to remove his bandages. The dog blinked rapidly, head tilting, nostrils flaring. And then he froze, his gaze clearer now, locking on Jacob. He whined, tail sweeping the floor, then bounded forward to press his muzzle into Jacob's lap. For the first time, they saw each other, not just with ears and noses and hands, but with eyes. The ride home felt different. Jacob kept glancing out the window, drinking in the misty outlines of buildings, the shifting light on the water. Captain's head rested against his thigh, eyes tracking the passing world. That evening, Michael and Sarah made it official. Over dinner, Jacob's first attempt at helping set the table by sight, Michael slid a folder across to him. Inside were adoption papers already signed. "You're home now," Michael said simply. Jacob bit his lip, fighting back a flood of emotions. "I've been home since the day you found me," he whispered. Sarah's plans, once just sketches in her notebook, now had a name: Two Lights Foundation. It would serve street children and abandoned animals, offering shelter, care, and second chances, just as Jacob and Captain had been given. The boy insisted on helping with the first outreach event, and Captain, sporting a new white scarf with the foundation's emblem, became their mascot. He had a particular gift for walking alongside blind children, his pace and gentle nudges guiding them as if it were second nature. Weeks later, standing at the harbor during the foundation's launch, Sarah watched Jacob laugh with a group of kids as Captain trotted beside them. The sun was setting, the sky painted in amber and rose. The boy's vision wasn't perfect, some edges blurred, some colors muted, but there was a light in his eyes that needed no correction. And as for Captain, every time his gaze found Jacob's, his tale told the whole story. They had both learned to see again, not just with their eyes, but with the deep, unshakable trust that had saved them. Sometimes, God's miracles do not arrive with thunder and lightning. They come quietly, in the form of a lost boy and a blind dog finding their way home to love. Jacob and Captain remind us that even when the world seems dark, God can place people and moments in our path to guide us back to the light. In our daily lives, we can choose to be that light for someone else. A hand that lifts, a word that heals, a heart that forgives. If this story touched your heart, share it with others so they too can see the beauty of faith and kindness. Leave a comment below and tell us how you have seen God's hand at work in your life. And if you believe that He still works miracles today, write Amen in the comments. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that will warm your heart and strengthen your faith. May God bless you and your loved ones every day.